Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. In the previous week, we discussed how the approach to environment changed through time, like how the movement was first initiated for conservation, then for preservation, and now we're looking at the risk which we are seeing up front here. And we also learned about how we are reaching the tipping point. We went through the Global Environmental Status Report. We reviewed different drivers of change. We also looked into air, biodiversity, oceans and coasts, land and soil and freshwater status, like globally what's happening. And in many of the cases, we also looked at Indian context. So now, after going through the environmental status, we understand where we stand and what challenges are placed before us. So this week, we will try to understand the concept of sustainable developments, what it means, the purpose, scope of EIA, and then the legislative framework within which EIA works. So that is what we're going to dedicate this week for. While we go through this particular segment, think, reflect, and connect with the global and your own local environment, what you must be seeing, the status of that environment, and review what EIA can do and what are the limitations of EIA. For example, you may recollect you saw this image where you reviewed how our requirements, needs, uses are multiple and how there are conflicting interests. How exploitation of one resource or activity can impact many other, including environment. We also saw how the increase in population, we need more and more of economic development. For that, we need to build infrastructure, set up industries, we undertake mining. And with that, we consume more resources and generate more waste in the environment. Therefore, this sustainable development becomes essential for us, like really need to look into it. So accordingly, for this particular segment, because of the sustainable development, the EIA was developed as a tool. So we're going to cover that. So our coverage for today would include, we'll look into the overview of environmental impact assessment, why it was introduced, and then we'll look into the definitions of environmental impact assessment, and we'll look into its process, and then the purpose, the core purpose of EIA. So the expected learning outcomes which we are seeing, which is expected from you after completion of this particular session, is that you should be able to discuss the concept of EIA, what is the entire idea behind it, and then review various definitions. That you may find a lot of definitions, so you should be able to review various definitions of environmental impact assessment and understand the core idea behind it. Then you should be able to review the process, like what process is really followed under EIA, and then you should discuss the purpose of EIA. So that will be our coverage today, and then the learning outcomes expected from you. So because we are looking at sustainable development, and we saw the background, we discussed all the environmental status, we looked at the development part of it, and what's the conflict, what are the multiple uses, and what are the conflicting uses here. Because of that, it's very important that we look at the sustainable development. And the major push for this particular concept was provided in 1987 in the Brundtland report of the World Commission on Environment and Development at Rio Summit in 1992. So we see that this particular concept was really pushed in this particular time. And sustainable development, what do we really mean by it? It's about the better management of current activities in harmony with the environment. So we have seen all the conflict which comes, and so how we really manage our activities so that it's in harmony with the environment. So we see that in order to address this sustainability aspect, EIA as a tool was developed to review better ways to avoid or mitigate the possible damaging effects. So all the damaging effects which we saw, so how to mitigate them and how to mitigate those effects of future development which we are going to do on the environment at the planning stage itself. So how we can do it right away before that occurs. And through environmental impact assessment, EIA, we are able to assess the impacts of planned activity on environment in advance before we execute the project. Thereby we avoid any undesirable situation, and those situations can be short term or long term. The impact can be short term or long term. So it helps us to avoid, it helps us to foresee those kind of impacts and then avoid those impacts by this process. So EIA was first formally established in USA in 1969. After that it has spread worldwide now, and EIA has received a significant boost in all across the world, and especially after USA it was Europe with the introduction of EC directives on EIA in 1985. This was implemented in UK in 1988. In India, if you look at India, EIA started 1976-77 when the Planning Commission asked then the Department of Science and Technology, DST, to examine the River Valley project from the environmental angle. So that is when we really started looking into it. Subsequently, various other projects was brought under the purview of EIA. And it was in 1994 when EIA was made mandatory in India under the Environmental Protection of 1986. So we see that EIA as a process, as a tool, countries have adopted it. They have expanded the process, they have advanced the process. And when we look at EIA as a process, it has continuously progressed. So we should, whenever we study EIA, we should review EIA as an ongoing concept, because it's continuously developing and evolving. And we also need to learn this particular subject from the contextual experience. So how it works in one place and how differently it works in some other place. So with the advancement, we also witnessed considerable change in legislation and guidances coming from national and international sources. So there's a lot of information and guidance coming at different level. Like you can see European Commission, and then you can also see World Bank, International Finance Corporation. So, and then you also see the Ministry of Environment and Forest for Climate Change. You also see MOEFCC in the Indian context. So now moving on, let us first look at definitions of EIA. There are range of definitions we see, and those definitions vary from the kind from being very broad definition to being very specific definition, being very lengthy definition to very small definitions we see. So here we can see the broader definition we find is by Munn, given in 1979, which refers to the need to identify and predict the impact on the environment. So it is highlighting the word identify and predict. and looking at the impact on the environment and on men's health and well-being. So it's not only talking about the environment but also about the health and well-being of ours, of the any proposal which comes up or any policies which comes up, programs which comes, projects which comes, or any operational procedure, and to interpret and communicate information about the impact. So you may also note that we are talking about interpreting it, interpreting the impact, and also communicating it, communicating about the impact to the larger community and to the decision makers. So it talks about identifying, predicting, and you can see the range of things which are covered here, as well as interpreting it and then communicating it. So you see how we are defining EIA here. Other definition which we can see is very brief definition given by UNECE, given in 1991. It says that EIA is an assessment of the impact of a planned activity on the environment. So you can think how it is different from the previous one which we saw. It's just a one-liner which says that it's the assessment of impact. So whatever impact will happen, it's going to assess that, and we are looking at the planned activity on the environment. So it's only talking about the environment here. Here we are looking at EIA definition adopted by International Association for Impact Assessment, IAIA, which says EIA is the process of identifying, predicting, evaluating, and mitigating the biophysical, social, and other relevant effects of the proposed development proposal prior to major decisions being taken and commitments made. So here again you look at, we are trying to identify, we are trying to predict, we are trying to assess, and at the same time we are trying to mitigate it, reduce the impact. And these impact on the biophysical space, social domain, as well as any other relevant effects. So of the development proposals, whatever we want to do of that, we need to take care of all these aspects and then accordingly make a major decision about whether this development proposal has to be taken up or not, or what kind of mitigations would be adopted following that. So now we'll look at the environmental impact assessment process. So that was about the definitions we saw. If you look at the practical meaning of EIA, it is a process. It is a systematic process that we adopt through which we examine the environmental consequences, the impact, what impact it has on the environment of development actions. So whatever development action we're going to take in terms of projects, so of that, the impact on the environment, such as like the development action could be such as building of highways, building of factory, or undertaking mining activity or so on, and we undertake this in advance. So before we even do that activity, we do this assessment before undertaking that activity. So EIA process requires number of steps as outlined in this diagram. You can see it in this diagram here. There are four main key stages in the EIA process: screening, scoping, and identification of impact, which you see in the first box. So the first box shows you that first we're going to screen, scope, and identify the impact. The second, you can see impact prediction, where you see what project activity will have, what kind, what intensity, what extent of impact or nature of impact. We see it in the second box here. In the third box, you see the process of review and decision making. So once you have done the impact prediction, then you review it, and in the fourth box, the fourth stage, you see the post decision monitoring. So once we have made the decision, then we follow it up and we see what's really going on based on our prediction, what we have made. So you also see public consultation. If you look at the image here, you would also see the public consultation and participation at various stages, and the process is cyclic. If you'll see that arrows going up in you'll see that the process is cyclic in nature, requiring revisiting your previous steps. And then there's also a system of feedback and then interaction between various steps. This is conceptual process and varies from country to country as per the context. So this EIA, what you're seeing here might not be same for your country. So this process varies. Here we are looking at very standardized process, a very generalized process to understand the concept of EIA. We shall cover all these in details in the following lectures. So looking at each of the steps, so first looking at the project screening step, where we narrow the applications of EIA to those projects that may have significant environmental impact. So we're going to, we will have a lot of activities, like you saw in the range of human activities which cause impact on the environment. But when you consider them individually, the impact might be insignificant. Further, you see that what will be practical to monitor or regulate. So that kind of screening we do here. If you may recollect, in the Global Environment Report, when we were studying the environmental status, we had seen that maximum impact was from agriculture in a cumulative manner. So you saw that mostly at the first or the second negative impact was coming from the agriculture activity, which was causing land use change, loss of forests, and then also land degradation. However, at individual farmers level or individual site level, the impact would be negligible, insignificant. So will it be feasible to undertake EIA for that? So you need to think like what could really come under this. Therefore, in this stage, screening is undertaken to determine whether EIA is needed or not. So for what kind of activity, the scale of activity, the nature of activity being undertaken, whether that would need an EIA or not. And it's important to look at it because it's time consuming and it needs resources of all kind to undertake EIA. So screening, we see that also varies from country to country. For example, in the developed countries, the process of screening is well defined. So for instance, in EU countries, competent authorities, they decide whether the environmental impact assessment is required or not, and that they decide based on advice from the developers, NGOs, and statutory councillors. In Japan, we see that screening decision is made by the authorizing agency, the involved agency, and they have certain criteria. Based on that, they decide whether EIA is required for that particular action or not. And in Canada, we see the federal authority, that's the main central authority, would determine whether an EIA is required or not. So the developed countries have this system in place. And whereas we see that in many of the developing countries, as per UN training notes, we see that screening practice in EIA is very weak. And in most cases, there is a list of activities. So they have defined list of activities that require EIA, but without any threshold values. So they do not have values like for even the activities could vary with size. So and then its impact could vary accordingly. So but then mostly there is no threshold value which is given. So that's what trend we see. In India, if you look at it, screening is done on the basis of a defined list. So we also have a list, and we have threshold values on the size of the project that is used for categorizing the project. And based on that, we decide whether the project will be cleared, requires EIA or not, and if it will be cleared by the state government or the central government. So those kind of decisions are made, and even this process has certain benefit. Even though it is done by list, it has the benefit of saving time and resources, and it avoids unnecessary review period. So in the list here, you can see this is used for Indian context. You can see how those categories are defined and how, depending on the scale of work, nature of work, whether EIA is required or not required, or which agency will deal with it, or to what extent the study has to be done. So, moving on to the next stage in the process, we see the process has scoping. In scoping, we identify the possible impact of the project, and this is done in the beginning of the project. And we also look at the impact of the alternatives. So there might be one solution and there might be alternative solutions also, and we look at the possible impact of it, like what could really happen. So the purpose of doing this is to really invest our time in those areas where really the impact assessment is needed, and being able to identify it, and to remove the areas where you might not find significant impact. So that kind of understanding would save our resources and time. Further, we see that one should also give due consideration to the alternatives where it is there. And when we give due consideration to the alternative, it ensures that the proponents of the project have considered all feasible approach. So once one project is coming, and then if the alternatives are also there, then it ensures that the person who is proposing, the proponent who is proposing it, has looked into all the possible aspect of locating it, the way it has been designed, so on, in the proposal itself. So these alternatives may not just be with the location, but it can be with the alternative scale. So some project might be large, or that same work can be done at a smaller scale with lesser impact. And then one could also have alternative processes in the whatever they are producing. They can have alternatives in terms of layouts, and then also in what conditions they operate. And one can also look into like what will really happen when no action is taken, meaning if we do not undertake the project altogether, what kind of impact, positive or negative, it will have. So mostly projects come because it's because of the development, and it creates jobs, and it also meets a lot of demand. But if it has adverse negative impact and of a significant level, then we might not do it. So further in the process, we also develop the description of the project or the development action, whichever we are going to take it, and we justify the purpose and rationale of the project. And as this particular stage is undertaken to establish an understanding of its various characteristic of the project, including like what kind of stages of development, location and process will be involved. For example, if you're taking a highway activity, then you might be looking into like the land acquisition part of it, the preparation part of it, and then the functioning part of it. So what all different stages would be there. So in the description part, you would be taking care of all these stages which will be involved, and what location and alternatives are there. So you would be describing all this in your project description. The process also involves preparation of environmental baseline study results. So this is one of the significant components and important components. And you study this in present as well as in future state of the environment. You establish what is the status of environment and what is going to happen with the project coming in. And you also check this without the project. So if we do not do anything, what will happen to the same environment? So all those baseline study with and without projects are undertaken. We are going to look at these in detail when we study the methods part. We'll see how these baseline studies are undertaken under different theme areas in detail at that time. So, this particular baseline study allows us to have a clear perspective of what kind of changes are predicted due to the proposed activities. So, what will really happen in this case. So, after doing this, we look into the key impacts. What kind of key impacts will be there? So, we identify those key impacts. And then we also look at the significant environmental impact. It can be both adverse, it can be beneficiary also because we are doing it for the development purpose. So you'll have certain benefiting impact. Then you might also have adverse impact, and these all have to be taken for the detailed study. So moving on to the next box, we see the next stage, that is the predict impact of the proposed activities. So after we identify the key impacts, we start the prediction of the impact, like what will happen. So here the purpose is to identify the magnitude. So what we do here, we identify the magnitude, we look at like how much the impact would be, to what extent it would be, and other characteristics which are very decisive to determine whether the project has to be taken or not. And we'll also look into how we make those decisions in the later part of the lecture. So this process is an important process, and the process can be regressive and technical because you might be using a lot of other detailed technical methods to assess what kind of impact and what kind of nature of impact is happening. We shall be covering this aspect in detail while reviewing methods in AIA. So based on the impact, like what impact we have identified, we evaluate and assess the significance. So you may pay attention to the word significance of the predicted impact. So impacts could be, there can be many impacts, but you need to also check the significance of the predicted impact and review any adverse impact. So significance wise, you would see that how much is the impact, how large would be the impact, to what extent the impact would be. So based on that, you would review any adverse impact, any negative impact. So the evaluation and assessment of this significance, when we do this, it allows us to focus on the main negative impact. So we look at the main impacts, and then based on that, we remove the other which do not have significant impacts. Another level of refinement we do here. So based on the identified adverse impact, the negative impact, measures are identified and suggestions are made for mitigation. So like if this impact would happen, and then how we're going to mitigate it, reduce the impact of this. So when we mitigation allows to avoid or to reduce, remedy or compensate for any significant adverse impact. So in the entire process, we also ensure public consultation. Like you can see in the diagram, we ensure public consultation and participation. This by doing this, we ensure the quality of the process, which allows the process to be comprehensive, like complete, and it involves all the important aspects. So when it's comprehensive, it involves all the important aspects from different stakeholders, and it also helps in making meaningful assessments. So it makes sense to all the stakeholders, all the parties which are involved in or will be affected by the proposed development. So after this, the finding of the environmental assessment are presented. So presentation, you might think, might be a very, very simple work, but this is a very vital step. And all the good work involved in the AIA process can go waste if presentation is not really carefully made. So this stage also involves review. in this, when the presentation is made, it also involves review, where a systematic appraisal is made about the quality of assessment. So whatever you have prepared based on the identified impact and the impact assessment and the significance, then the entire review is done, and it helps to come to arrive at a decision. So thereafter, following all the facts placed for the decision making, the decision is taken by the relevant authority, so whoever is empowered authority to make the decision for EIA, for allowing that project to happen. In Indian context, it would be based on the screening and whether central government or state government would make the decision for the EIA report. So after this, as we see in the next box, post-decision monitoring stage comes, in which all the reading of the recordings of the findings, look what impact you have identified, that you record all those. And this stage helps in efficient project management. So it helps you to undertake efficiently what has to be done. Thereafter, you keep on, facilitate auditing of the mitigation measures. So in the process, you have said that you're going to mitigate these particular impact by having certain measures. You will take care of all the impact which will happen, and then auditing will take place to ensure that those measures are taken place. Here the actual results are tested. So whatever you have done, impact prediction in your case, here the results are tested. This helps to monitor and assess the quality of impact. This is an important step for learning the EIA process in long run as well. So what really works, what kind of methods really work, you can review them. So now let us look at the final product of the EIA project. The final output product of EIA is a report. So as a person, as a professional, if you're undertaking an EIA EIA assignment, for you the report would be the output, that would be the product. And in some of the domain or in the context, EIA is referred as environmental statement. So many places you might read environmental statement report, and then you might also find environmental impact assessment report. So you might look at these terminologies. You may come across all these terminologies for this same process. So you may see these variations. In the report, all the information is systematically analyzed. So you saw the process. So in the report, all this is systematically analyzed in the entire process of EIA, and this information is analyzed and organized and presented to the decision makers and the reviewing body. So in the report, there's a lot of things as per the process is covered, and there's a non-technical summary also, which because the report content could be a lot complex and might have a lot of technical details. So it's important that it also has non-technical summary. This is an important element of the documents, and many of this would be read by many people. So EIA can be, like I said, it can be very complex, and then summary can really help to improve the communication with the various partners involved. So even the stakeholders would be reading it and others. So that would be really helpful. So we will look here very briefly just to understand what we are really in the process of preparing. And at the latest stage of the course, we will look at this in considerable details with example. So for quick understanding, following chapters are usually given. We see that you have introduction, methods and key issues, which really forms the first part, where you give the introduction to the project, you tell what methodology you followed, and then you also summarize the key issues. And then you also give the background to the proposed development, like what is the preliminary study telling and why it has to be taken up, what's the planning, what are the alternatives, and what kind of site has been selected for the purpose. And then you describe the site, and then you give the baseline condition, and then you also give the details of the proposed development. So likewise, you also give the impact assessment, and within that impact assessment, you might be covering land use, geology, hydrology, air quality, climate and climate change, ecology, ecosystem, noise, and so on, and then also look into socio-economic or health or transportation as per the scope of the EIA process. So you might be providing all those things, and then you would also be giving follow up and management in your report, where you will tell how the project impact will be monitored and how things will be managed. So, environmental impact assessments practice vary from study to study, from country to country, and best practice is constantly evolving. So, we see that in early when study, EIA practice in several countries advocated changes in the process and documentation, and it gave a lot of emphasis on the socioeconomic dimension, public participation, and after the decision activity. So all this has been going on improving, and then the more recent reviews of operation also highlights the EC directives also highlight that public participation is very important. So that was about the report part. Coming to the last segment of our session, now we'll look at the purpose of environmental impact assessment. So the process and the output helps in decision making. So when we do this, the main thing, the main purpose is to allow to make decision, to arrive at an informed decision with a systematic manner. So it is helping. So when you're preparing an EIA report, the key purpose is allow somebody, the decision maker, to really arrive at an informed and a systematic decision making. And then EIA process helps us to understand some of the trade-offs, like what we are really compromising with and what we are really gaining. So it helps you to understand those trade-offs, because we understand these trade-offs, we can make rational and structured decisions. So once those things are clear, we can make those decisions. EIA also provides platform for negotiation. So it's not really practiced on ground, but then it really provides a platform for negotiation between the developer and stakeholders, and even between the authorities which are involved, the planning authorities which are involved here, or approving authority. So it allows the negotiation among them. And because of this, when there is facilitation of negotiation, negotiation is possible. Because of this, the balanced results can be achieved. So EIA helps in also supporting the development action. So we might think it's a hurdle, it's a checkpoint for the development actions, but it also helps and supports the development action, because it reduces unforeseen conditions, reduces the trouble, the time, and the cost for the proponent of the project. EIA leads to environmentally sensitive development. See, the whole idea, we saw the environmental status, we talked about the sustainable development. So the whole idea about EIA is that it leads to environmentally sensitive development. So people in the process are also conscious the approach which you adopt is also aligned with the environment. It also helps to build a positive image for the project developers. So even the project developers who would take systematically and acknowledge all this and address all this, it provides them a good image. And we also see that there are convention which highlights the need for public participation, which emphasize the need for public consultation. So when people are involved, more and more acceptance comes. So you see that Aarhus Convention by UNECE provides these directives, as well as EC public participation directives are also there, which emphasizes the need for public consultation. EIA can be very useful vehicle for engaging with communities and stakeholders and helping those potentially affected by the proposed development. So because of this, the public participation, it can really help. It will engage with the community and it can really help, and it will not only help the decision makers but also the community which is involved, help them to make informed decision and to be fully involved in the planning and development process. So as we have already seen at the backdrop of it, EIA is seen as an instrument for sustainable development. So EIA came as an instrument for sustainable development. So a review of development activities, by activities, we will be able to attain sustainable development to a certain extent. You may reflect on the projects for which EIA is done and how much through this process we can address the sustainable development. So that was about the understanding of defining EIA and looking at its process and the key purpose of EIA. So summarizing what we covered today, so we discussed the concept of EIA, we looked at the definitions, and then we looked at the process and the purpose of EIA. Here you can see the references. Our coverage has been limited as the scope of the subject. Additional resources to read and watch are provided to you in the list given here. And please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have, to share your opinion, experiences, and suggestions. So that's all for today. Thank you.